Hi, everybody. Welcome to MassBio's special town hall on what election results mean for the biopharma industry. As it stands now, we still do not know who the next President of the United States will be, but that doesn't mean we can't have a robust conversation on how the industry may fare under either candidate. I'm Jennifer Nason, Senior Director of Communications for MassBio, and I'm thrilled to be joined by MassBio President and CEO, Bob Coughlin, along with Robert A. Sherman, Senior Counsel for Greenberg Traurig and founding member and former co-managing shareholder of the firm's Boston office. Bob most recently served as a United States Ambassador to Portugal from 2014 to 2017, having been nominated by President Barack Obama and unanimously confirmed by the United States Senate. Ambassador Sherman has also been part of the Biden campaign since its inception. We're also joined by Tamar Thompson, Vice President of U.S. Government Affairs for Alexion Pharmaceuticals and current MassBio board member. Tamar has extensive market access experience and over the course of her career has worked with governmental agencies, private payers, congressional leaders, and patient advocacy groups to ensure optimal patient access to existing and new therapies, including rare disease. Welcome, everybody. We're thrilled to have you with us.
Yeah, welcome, folks. And I can't thank the Ambassador and Tamar enough for joining us today. These are two people who many times in my career I turn to for advice as it relates to all things government and where government intersects with the patient community. And I can't think of a more exciting time to have this conversation in light of what's going on in our country right now. So thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Tamar. And Jenny, as always, thank you for moderating these town hall discussions.
Perfect. Well, we are thrilled to have all of you with us. And as always, I'm going to dive in with some questions, but we want this to be an interactive conversation. So please, audience, ask questions throughout. You can either log into YouTube and ask questions through the live chat function, or you can also ask questions anonymously through the comments section. And we'll get to as many as we can. All right, so let's dive in. Let's start with Trump, who has proposed aggressive drug pricing reforms in his first term, especially with his proposals to implement international reference pricing, where Medicare would reimburse for drugs based on foreign drug prices. If Trump wins, should we expect more of the same, or does the dynamic shift since he's not running for re-election in 4 years? Tamar, why don't we start with you?
Sure, thanks, Jenny. I think the interesting thing about President Trump, which may, have been an attractive quality in his election process in 2016, is that he is unpredictable, right? And so it's hard to say. It's hard to say where he'll go if there's a new Trump administration in 2021. I think, though, the first priority for any new administration is that first 100 days. And although, he's the incumbent, I would imagine that there would be changes to the cabinet. I would imagine that, we would continue on with the divided Congress, and therefore we'd have to look at new legislative priorities. And I would, not want us to forget that we are living through a little thing called a pandemic here. And we are in need of a next COVID rescue package. And so I think we're going to have to deal with that in, hopefully in the lame duck session, but we still have the residual of that to deal with. So long-winded way maybe of saying that drug pricing may not be the first and foremost of the priorities of any administration, but I don't think that drug pricing goes away. I don't think that it's a topic that we can look at and say, oh, glad we dodged that bullet. I do think that drug pricing reform will continue on. There are a number of people who are driving the agenda for that. Above and beyond, the politicians and members of Congress or the White House, and it's a legitimate conversation that needs to be had for a plethora of reasons. So, while it may not be on the agenda for the first 100 days, I think whatever we end up with, as either a Trump or Biden administration, we should absolutely continue thinking about how we move forward with drug price reform packages.
So if I could add to that, but first, let me thank MassBio for putting this together and for having me. I love this organization, and I'm always happy to get invited, particularly to a topic that says what the election means for the industry when we don't know what the results of an election are. And I blame Bob Coughlin for that, since apparently he remembers his days in politics when he ran for office, elections were called at 8:01, the day of the vote, because he had such overwhelming support in his community. But that, nationally, these things don't happen so quickly anymore. But having said that, it's interesting. I think there's two things about Donald Trump we know. One is that he doesn't have a particular governing philosophy. He's a transactional president, and that comes from his background as in the real estate industry as a transactional businessman. So it seemed clear to me that the executive order, on most favorable nation pricing for drug prices was really geared for the election and as a setup. Now that the election has passed, what's the other side of the transaction for him to expend political capital on that particular issue? So I think that there's no doubt in my mind, and Tamar is absolutely correct, that drug pricing has been an issue on both sides of the aisle, both Democrats and Republicans. It's not going to go away, and I think that. On the other hand, whether Trump prioritizes that or not is we just have to see.
Yeah, Jenny, if I were to add to that too, I agree with both the ambassador and Tamar, but I would say, and I think we're going to come back to this throughout the discussion here this morning. As an industry, we need to do a better job educating the public of the value that these therapies bring to the healthcare system. Because look, whether it's Trump with his executive orders or Biden out on the stump, it's easy for people to attack the pharma industry and say drugs are too expensive. Drugs are only 14% of the overall cost of healthcare. If drugs were free, it'd be horrible. There'd be no new drugs because nobody would be incentivized to invent them. And it still doesn't cure or solve the problem of the rising cost of healthcare. So again, we got to double down as an industry and do a better job educating the public so that politicians, candidates, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, don't take the easy way out by saying, oh, I'm going to go after big pharma because it's politically popular to do so. To Trump, if there are 4 more years of a Trump administration, I don't think they're going to have the energy or the appetite to continue to go after these executive orders. I think they'll probably focus on things that are more important other than popular campaign slogans. So, I'm hopeful that, whoever is the president of the United States moving forward, whether it's President Trump moving forward or President Biden moving forward, I'm hoping that they pay more attention to other issues other than drug pricing, where their misguided approach to it isn't going to solve the problem.
Well, Bob, as always, you are the best ambassador, no pun intended, for the industry. And what a great spokesperson you are. We're so fortunate to have you in that role, and you're absolutely right. I do think that, we have to do a better job in educating, but I do also feel that we're in a place where things have to change, right? And to your point, we need to find ways to pay for drugs in a manner that allows us to reflect where we are in innovation. We have new therapies that are curative. The world asked for cures, and now we have them. And, you can't pay for those in the same way that you pay for chronic care drugs. It's just the reality of technology. And so I invite the opportunity to continue the dialogue, to continue the education process. But to your point, it is infuriating to have a one-sided, passionate conversation for political headlines. So if we're going to continue the dialogue, then let's do it in a meaningful way that results in meaningful solutions for the long term and reflective. I'm sorry, my dog wants to join our conversation. Reflective of where we are at this point in time for industry. So I couldn't agree with you more on that.
I think, though, I would add a caution in this. This issue is going to play out in the public sphere. It's been in the public sphere. And, when you have Republicans and Democrats both ganging up on an industry. It's never good for that industry. I mean, my God, the industry may have even a worse reputation than lawyers do, and that shows you how low it may be going right now. So I think the industry has to get creative in this, not fight the last war, but figure out where it is. It may not just simply work, to do a better explanation of where drug pricing comes from, although that's part of the solution, but that may not be the full component of the solution. It may be, okay, where do we really feel where that we're endangered? Obviously, the reference, the setting of prices by reference pricing to other nations, or having panels determine the value of a drug and then setting prices based on an independent panel. I mean that's a really troublesome thing, no matter what. And both sides have talked about those kinds of issues. So I think what the industry needs to do is figure out, okay, what can't we live with, and what can we live with beyond just simply doing a better job of explaining and trying to, and hopefully this may be a time where there's a grand bargain to be made on drug pricing.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of your points. And I think, Bob and I talk about this often, but the COVID-19 pandemic, may be changing things a little bit. I think everyone now knows what it's like to live with an unmet medical need. There is this new appreciation of our industry, and we'll see if that remains. But let's get into Biden a little bit. I mean, given what we know about Biden's position on drug pricing, especially his support for capping drug prices and setting punitive penalties for high-cost drugs, will this be a top priority for his administration after he's able to address COVID-19 response and vaccine rollout? As Tamar and all of you agreed, that is the priority. But will this be a key priority in those 4 years? Ambassador Sherman, why don't I start with you?
So I think there's a few principles to discuss here, and which will lead us to where we need to get to. First and foremost, the issue of healthcare is personal to Joe Biden. This isn't just simply a political issue. He lost a son to cancer. He himself was given last rites because of a brain aneurysm back then. He understands what families go through, and he understands that the solutions to a lot of people's problems come from this industry. You save lives. And I know, and I don't think there's a doubt about it. And I think there's an opportunity, and you're dealing with somebody that understands that to his core. So I think that that the second piece I would say is, you got to take with a certain grain of salt campaign promises. He's dealing in a Democratic primary. He's dealing with a progressive movement that's to the left of where he is personally. I think the fact now that you've got to actually govern moderates that. It's not to say you're not held to your promises, but Joe Biden throughout his career has been a compromiser. So I think that there is a real opportunity now on the issue of drug pricing to not assume that what's on the campaign platform in healthcare is identical to the way he's going to govern. I think that again, looking at the realities of the situation, drug pricing is not going to go away, but it doesn't have to be as stark as it otherwise would. And let me just say one more thing. If you have any doubt about how personal healthcare is to Joe Biden and his feelings, on Election Day morning, where did Joe Biden go before he went on the trail? He went to the grave of his son and prayed over his son. So this is an opportunity for the industry to deal with somebody that feels viscerally about the same issues you do in a positive way, I wouldn't pass it up.
Wow.
Well said.
You know, if Tamar, I'm curious to hear your thoughts as well, but if I could add to that and just follow up on what the ambassador said, you know, the last opportunity I had to meet with Vice President Biden in person was before he was the nominee, and he was on the campaign trail up in New Hampshire, and he was doing some site visits in Boston. I had the pleasure of meeting with him and talking about our industry. It was in February, and that's what we talked about. He talked about his son, Bo, and he was asking how my son, Bobby, with CF was doing, and he's aware of the advances that we're able to make in cystic fibrosis research that's keeping my kid alive today. So, I mean, to think, you know, I am, as much as the party, the Democratic Party, and the campaign would talk about, you know, as I say often to anyone who listens, misguided approaches, yet politically convenient statements or comments. I think I tend to agree. I know I agree with the ambassador that we could have a person, if Vice President Biden becomes President Biden, I think there's a person there that really understands our whole slogan and mantra of being patient-driven, because he leads a patient-driven life based on his own personal experiences. And there's nothing more powerful than that.
That's right, Bob. I would just add into the conversation here. While I'm in rare diseases today, Bob, you know very well that I joined my current company from an oncology company. And so I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that, you know, Joe Biden led the initiative on the moonshots at the end of the Obama years, which, you know, was the foundation of trying to get new treatments to patients faster, right? And pushing that initiative forward. So we're shooting for the moon to help cure cancer. And he was the face of that, and that obviously continues on with the Biden Foundation. So I think that we do have a huge opportunity to continue the good work that, you know, was begun under the Moonshot initiative in the last years of the Obama administration as well.
And, you know, Tamar, it's, you know, I think you bring up another point. If anybody thinks that Joe Biden is just focused on the cancer moonshot, they're mistaken. You know, he understands, you know, how families are devastated by the serious illnesses and diseases that are out there. You know, some dovetail right into government priorities. You know, the amount of money we're going to spend on treating Alzheimer's patients as we have an aging population is, to him, it's twofold. It's the budget that goes into it, but it's also the devastation that it causes to the families watching loved ones wither away from that. So again, the industry kind of focusing on these kinds of things. He has said publicly that the amount of money that has been put aside for research and development in healthcare and biotech needs to be increased dramatically. So I think you're going to see much more funding that's going to go into research and development. I think that there's opportunities again for the industry to have a seat at the table when it comes to reforming NIH. As an example, that reforming the process for that companies have to go through with the FDA when they're getting patents. So I think that in general, in a Biden administration, if there is an assumption that this is a snapback to the Obama administration, it is a faulty assumption. This is not Obama 3, this would be Biden 1, and that provides unique opportunities for this industry. And I think, once again, if there's a theme you're going to get from my remarks, it's think about how you want to go about this. Think about creatively and lean forward, because you're going to have a receptive administration on these kinds of issues.
Thank you for all of those great points. We do have some questions coming in from the audience, so I'm going to go to the first one. Back to COVID-19. Does COVID-19 and the industry's unprecedented work to quickly create vaccines and therapeutics change the political dynamic at all in DC? I mean, will this last? Will this really change things?
I'll take a shot at that.
No, okay, go ahead, Bob. Yeah, I'll throw it to you.
Well, yeah, it does, but it's all, we got to make sure that this isn't what have you done for me lately situation, right? All of the politicians, whether it's on local, state, or federal issues right now, is like, why does it take so long to invent a vaccine? Well, when you take the time to teach them and talk about why it is so difficult, it does open their eyes to how difficult it is to, solve unmet medical need for all indications. So yeah, that does help us a lot. But I think as we talk about the political dynamic, and I know this isn't a topic for today's, but we should have another town hall that talks about the dynamic that comes out of Speaker Pelosi's office and Leader McConnell's office on the Senate, because this is something that we need to change the political dynamic in the House and the Senate, not just with the administration, right? So it's like we really need to do a better job capitalizing, and I say this in a really good way. This pandemic is horrible. We know that, but we need to really utilize this point in time to realize, I mean, did we ever think that the most important thing to the world's economy would be a vaccine? And for people getting back to some sense of normalcy would be a vaccine? Come on, I never thought that, and I work in the industry. So to think that we have this opportunity right now to change the narrative and do the right thing and make sure that the vaccine is deployed in a good way, in a real way, in a fair way, and that underserved communities are treated the same way those who have more means. I mean, we have to price it right. Right? There's a lot of things that we can do as an industry to get this right. And I'm confident that working with, the leaders of our industry, the leaders at Bio, the leaders at Pharma, the folks down in DC, we're going to do this the right way.
Yeah, well stated, Bob. I would just add in, and I hate to be more of a little bit of a pessimist to Bob's high energy on this, is that I think it's a mixed bag. There are things with Project Warp Speed that, it has created opportunity for industry to work in partnership with the government in new and meaningful ways. But we're moving fast. And I think that the term warp speed implies, something there that like we're just wanting to get it done quickly. And then that creates challenges around the science. And so, to Bob's point, we have to focus on not what have you done for me lately, but making sure the science is right and that we're moving forward in a manner that is going to be equitable for all. The other points that I will make is that, when we started this journey, we tend to focus on vaccines, and there are a number of therapeutics that are going to be the solution, as we've seen, quite frankly, with our own president and having, caught this virus himself. There are going to be treatments that are going to have to be the solution in the interim place until we get to the solution of a vaccine, and we have to have conversations about what that means. That's going to loop us back to the drug pricing conversation. And in the beginning of this, pandemic, that was an issue. We saw, Bob, you mentioned Speaker Pelosi's office. One of the first things that happened was, turn it to pharma and make sure you're not going to price gouge patients for these drugs. And we're like, well, first of all, there are already caps on vaccine pricing, so nobody is price gouging in this environment. But I do think that, we shouldn't be having a political conversation during a vaccine about, are you going to price gouge patients? The conversation should be everything that Bob just mentioned, which is we have to look at the science and the innovation, how long this takes. It's not a one and done. We don't just have vaccines on the shelf that we can just try out.
That's right.
This isn't a pair of jeans at the mall. You just don't pull one off of the shelf and try them on. That's not how it works. So I do think there's huge opportunity here, but there, the conversation in DC hasn't been always positive on industry and where we stand, in this fight against COVID. And that's unfortunate. And I'd be remiss if I also didn't mention the challenges with the FDA. I think the FDA, has done a fantastic job of response, but there are challenges with the way we're moving forward with therapies and how we're approving those under EUA and other mechanisms. And so I think that the COVID situation has brought opportunity to shine a light on industry and our value to the world, but it also has highlighted a number of the political, differences that we have amongst us that we can't seem to overcome. And, that I hope we can move forward, in a more meaningful way on that front as well.
I think that raises another thing, which is, that this may not be the last pandemic we face, and the Biden administration
will know that. They're not only thinking right now, and I know this, they're not only thinking about how we deal with the current pandemic, but how should we prepare for a future pandemic. And one of the things that I think has come out of that is the need for partnership between government and industry. And again, that provides certain opportunities. As they're thinking about the next pandemic, I know one thing that has been discussed is the need for government to perhaps create high capacity testing facilities. For medicines and drugs and the like, which can be done in collaboration for industry. What's the word I hear when I hear that? Opportunity. It's an opportunity to do that. We have DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, doing cutting edge, innovative work in the world of DARPA. I'm in the world of defense. Sorry about that. There's talk about a HARPA doing the same thing in a Biden administration for health. Again, I hear the word opportunity there, the notion of collaboration, and that collaboration doesn't have to be limited to the next pandemic, but in preparing for the next pandemic, that provides the building blocks to do things on a much wider scale.
Thank you all for these thoughts. I completely agree. And I think that partnership between industry and government is something we talk about all the time as critical to solving, our biggest healthcare crises. I want to get back to another likely scenario right now, since we still don't know the results of both the presidential and the Senate election. Although it looks as we stand now that Republicans may retain control of the Senate. If we have a Democratic president and a Republican Senate, what impact does that scenario have on the likelihood of severe drug legislation even passing? Tamar, could I start with you?
Sure. I think healthy tension is great, right? I think, it's almost refreshing to see a divided Congress in the sense that we've seen these, swings of the pendulum one way or the other so significantly. And as a result of that, we've seen maybe broad sweeping legislation in the last few administrations that could have deserved the opportunity to have a little more thought and time put into them so that we could have gotten it right, and instead of having to tweak it along the way. And I think the one thing that is for sure is that whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, all believe that drug pricing, it's still on the agenda, and that we need to contend with reform for drug pricing. And so I think the question is how we get there. And this is very similar to the COVID package, right? It's about the values of each administration and each party that's been brought forward, right? So if we're transitioning from a Trump administration to a Biden administration, price negotiation in HR 3, I would assume would be, the starting point for a drug pricing reform package. Versus the Republicans, I don't think that Grassley Wyden is the starting point for the Republican Party at large. No shade or disrespect to the senator, but I just don't think that that's directionally the way the party at large is going to want to go. And quite frankly, I don't think that, most favored nations, I know we have an EO, but I just don't think that, to compare our pricing model for a healthcare system that's completely different and complex from what we see in the ex-US market is the way that we're going to go on this as well. So I long-winded way of saying that I think we have a lot of opportunity for negotiation. Having a divided Congress could be a challenge for many. But given that former Senator Biden, Vice President Biden, to what we are now looking at as a potential President Biden, has a lot of long, deep relationships in the Senate and on the House side, quite frankly, that I know that he's a negotiator in a more meaningful and different way as it relates to DC politics. So I think that there's an opportunity here for us to find common ground, something that I think we've all been craving for, quite frankly, the last decade or more.
I think that to underscore what Tamar just said, Joe Biden
has wanted to be president. Run 3 times for the office, but he's a creature of the Senate. He loves the institution. He respects the institution. He's got relationships in the Senate, and so the fact that we have divided government, that may not be comforting for those that want to codify Roe versus Wade, for instance, or protect the Affordable Care Act from potential gutting by the Supreme Court through legislation. But one thing it does, I think, is it also protects Joe Biden from the progressive wing of his own party, because the fact that you've got the Republicans controlling the Senate means that this notion of I'll use Trump language, a radical socialist agenda or anything close to that, it ain't happening. So the word that comes to mind for me is compromise. That Joe Biden is a negotiator. When in the Obama administration, listen, I worked for President Obama. I have a great deal of respect for him, but the fact is he didn't love dealing with Congress. President Bush didn't love dealing with Congress. In the second Obama term, who got everything done that needed to get done in Congress? Joe Biden did all of that. So I think the fact is there is a possibility of a Biden-McConnell relationship and the ability to compromise to get things done. So again, getting back to my theme, opportunity. This is an opportunity, and I think that as Tamar pointed out before, and she's right, that it's just not simply going to be, well, we've got Republicans here, Democrats there, so nothing is going to get done. There's something more here.
I couldn't agree with the ambassador more. If I just want to just add to that real quick, and I know we're short on time, Jenny, but the ambassador brings up a great point. But we also need to throw a little political calculus out for the viewers. To have that split and that Republican backstop and the ability that bipartisan nature to slow things down, that isn't a bad thing for us. When, earlier on, we talked about how both the Republicans and the Democrats are coming after our industry in certain ways. To have that bipartisan nature slow it down, it gives us more time to work on a compromise that will not have unintended consequences that adversely affect the patient population. So that's opportunity for us. And just throwing a little political calculus out there to the audience.
Thank you all for those thoughts. And I know we are a few minutes over, and I know I didn't get to all of the audience questions, but this is a conversation that MassBio is going to continue. We're going to continue it, hopefully, when we know who our next president will be. So stay tuned for more of this in January. I just wanted to thank our guests again, Tamar, Ambassador Sherman, Bob. Thank you for your incredible insights. It's been such a pleasure to be here with you today. And I also just want to let everybody know, please join us for our next town hall, which is on December 1st, where Matthew Harrison, Managing Director and Head of Biotech Industry Research at Morgan Stanley, will share predictions for the biotech outlook in 2021. We'll also hold our Patient Advocacy Summit on November 12th. So we hope to see you there. And thank you, everyone, again for joining us.
Thank you, folks.